WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. It's Tuesdays, each and every Tuesday from WCLN Radio, Star Communications TV, Channel 16. We bring you information and hopefully educate all of us about things we need to know more about. I want to thank you for being with us today. I'm JW Simmons, your host. Our guest today is Lekkyiah Sellers. Lekkyiah, you're a foster care supervisor for Sampson County Department of Social Services. And Carlina Simmons. Carlina, you are a foster care program manager for Sampson County. Both you guys, in brief comments you've made about your life, have a calling for looking after children. And I'm going to use the word, big word here called salvation of children, because basically it comes down to that. I want to thank both of you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Foster care is going through a significant change of how you do things statewide. From what I can read, it's a collective of the way it's approached rather than the individuality of counties trying to enhance your capabilities. Carlina, I'm going to open with you and let you kind of explain to us what's happening on that level and how it's impacting how you do your job.
So currently the state is working through implementing some new practice models for the way that we practice social work and the way that we implement foster care services across the state. So it's inclusive of Medicaid, it's inclusive of our service delivery to children and families. So they've started with trainings on the senior management level as far as DSS directors, program managers, and how we can support our staff through the changes. There are some modules that supervisors are working on currently to get them trained in the new practice models. And then of course it trickles down to social work employees as well. So everybody is just gearing up right now. A lot of this is surrounding Ryland's Law and new practices that were implemented since that law was put in action. So we're just looking forward to being able to better serve our families, being able to communicate amongst leadership and our staff to be able to support everybody through these changes and hopefully see some good outcomes for families.
Lekkyiah, when I look at what Carlina is talking about and the kind of changes that's going on, you've got experience in Cumberland County, grew up here in the Lakewood areas, graduated from Lakewood High School. How is it impacting? I look at Cumberland and I see a thriving, large populated county. Fayetteville is a very diverse city. How is it impacting these changes, the rural communities that you work in and serve in each day?
In the rural communities, I will say that there is not as many resources coming from Cumberland. There's a wide variety of resources, but coming to a much smaller county, there is a lack of resources that kind of, I don't want to use the word prevent, but it's a struggle to get, the services that are needed.
I want to kind of, after giving folks a kind of an idea that foster care is going through some kind of statewide changes, it's kind of shaking things up a bit. But I want to back up now, if we can, and just kind of talk about what foster care is versus adoption, how that fits together, and kind of explain to people the need. Why do we need foster care? And who do you look to as being the folks that raise their hand and say, I'm willing to be a foster care parent, or I've thought about this? Let's talk about that, and I'll open again.
So foster care is in place because there are some children who just cannot safely remain in their home. Foster care is to be the last resort when social services is working with the family through some challenges that they're having, when we're working with the family as we receive allegations of abuse, neglect, or dependency, and we're trying to figure out what's going on with that family, how to best help them. Sometimes, unfortunately, the best way to keep that child safe is to remove them from the home.
One of the things that just strikes me when I think about foster care is not only the need for it, but the need for folks that have the qualifications to be foster care providers. What do you say to those folks, Lekkyiah? Is that, we need these people that open their homes or be part of this process. What do you think holds people back, and what have you seen that from people that stepped up and said, I want to help out?
I think that what holds a lot of people back is just not knowing. Whenever you have foster children, sometimes you don't always know, a lot of the history that comes with the child. It is a huge responsibility. You're basically acting as the parent of that child. Of course, the department is, involved, and we're monitoring the child in the home. But I think the responsibility is what kind of scares people away, and also the child's needs as well.
Carlina, the child's need and not knowing the history and those kinds of things, is this statewide movement to make some changes? Has it been brought into play to allow you more flexibility of where you place children? Several years ago, I remember having a conversation about foster care, and there was this thing that struck me that was interesting, is that there was a need from people from rural areas to actually place children in another state because they didn't have anywhere to go. How critical is this?
Well, at this time, we have a Kinship First initiative, which means that we look within the family first, because we don't want children to be placed with strangers. It's already traumatic to be removed from their parents, to be taken out of the home. Sometimes siblings have to be separated. So we try to look at family members or even friends of family, so the children have a familiar place, they have familiar faces, they already have connections and relationships to the people with whom they're living. So making sure that kinship providers are supported. I think regardless of whether you are a family member or a foster parent, these children are coming into the home with trauma. And so people have to be trained in how to deal with that. So there's trainings for kinship parents, family members, friends of family. So we're really trying to push forward with keeping children in a familiar setting, even though they've been removed from the home, and then making sure that there's supports in place for the adults who are going to have to see to the needs of the children each day.
A big question on that subject always comes up is the financial means to be able to sustain that child. And one article I recall reading, without quoting here, was there was this relationship that maybe the kinship would say, I can do this, but financially I just really can't afford to keep this child up. But yet the state would say, well, we don't have funds to pay a person of the family, but yet they have funds to pay somebody that's a foster care provider. How do we balance that, and how do we deal with that as far as a significant way to move that child within a family?
So there are opportunities for kinship providers to get licensed to become foster parents. And so it would be called a child-specific license, meaning if that person becomes a foster parent, their licensure is specific to the children who are in their home. so that they can get board payments for the children residing there. So there are those opportunities, and they would go through the classes and the training just like our foster parents do. And then once their home gets licensed, we can start to actually send them monthly board payments for those children in home.
We're seeing in the times we are now financially, where people are going through all kinds of trauma, regards to jobs, regards to affordability, all of those things boil down to money. Now, the question is, are we seeing that impacting foster care in the sense that children are sometimes being left behind because parents are just saying, look, I don't have a job, I can't continue to afford to raise this child? I mean, how critical is this subject? And I'll let you touch on that, because you're right out there where it's at.
I do believe that it is impacting families. One thing that we do assessments whenever we go out to the home, and one of the questions is being able to financially support the children. And I have seen recently where there's been an increase with families stating that they don't have the financial means to support or provide for the child.
And if that's the case, then somebody has to step in, somebody has to do something. So I want to kind of, I guess, parlay this to our next segment, because we're going to take a break here. But when we come back from this break, if we can, I want to talk about some of the specifics of foster care, of being a foster care provider. Is there a financial incentive there? How much is involved? What does a person do that's listening to this show and says, hadn't really thought about it before, but it might be something I want to do? So I'd like to kind of get into that subject. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking about foster care, we're talking about children, and we're also talking about our future, which involves all of the above. We'll be back in a moment.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us. We're talking about foster care today, and we're talking with two folks that have quite a bit of knowledge about that. We're talking with Lekkyiah Sellers, and we're also talking with Carlina Simmons, Program Manager Carlina at DSS, and Supervisor for Sampson County Department of Social Services. Both of you are in unique positions to look at foster care and what that means to people in this area. Because we're talking a rural area. Lekkyiah, we talked about that a bit. But I want folks to understand what a foster care parent looks like. What are you looking for? What are some of the things that folks need to think about if they're hearing the show today and they're thinking, well, I've got some time. I've done pretty well. I feel like I need to contribute back to life a little bit, and this is something I might want to do. How do they start that process, or how do they raise their hand and say, I'm going to do this? And I'll make that point simply by saying this. We've had folks on the show, and folks are pretty familiar with how they go somewhere and adopt an animal to keep in their house. But there's very little conversation, and I'm stand to be corrected, but there's very little conversation about what you do to be part of literally saving somebody's life. So how does that work, and who do they contact? And how do you promote, or is there any promotion where you reach out to community and say, we're looking foster care providers?
So we do make recruitment efforts within the community. There are several opportunities for us to participate at vendor fairs and informational type events where we set up and share information. The other thing too is that people can call. They can actually call me. My name's Carlina Simmons, and I can be reached at 592-4200, extension 3315. If anyone is interested in fostering, I'm definitely that point of contact and can connect them to our licensing supervisor, who is Kristen Coffey, and our licensing social worker, Joshua Harrell. So that's the start, just calling and saying, hey, I'm interested. At that point, we can kind of talk through with the person the requirements for foster care, which is that they be at least 21 years of age and willing to participate in our MAP classes, which is 30 hours of training, and follow through with the licensure process, which is another process after they complete classes. Mainly what we're looking for is just people who are willing to love children, people who are willing to endure through some tough times with kids who are coming in with trauma. Their behavior is not always the best. They need therapy. Depending on what a child has been through, they might have several medical appointments that they have to go to, dental appointments that they have to go to because of neglect and abuse. So not only are we working to physically get the child where they need to be, but we have to work through mentally and emotionally getting them where they need to be. And so, we don't want to sugarcoat. I don't want to scare people, but I also don't want to sugarcoat. People are not always getting a child who is, number one, happy to be there and free of the emotional and mental trauma that comes with what they've been through. And so they need people who are going to commit with them and stick with them through those hurdles, because the last thing that we want is a child to have to move around to several different homes because people are not able to manage their behavior. Because we see that a lot sometimes. You see kids kind of get shuffled around, especially if they have behaviors, and that's always difficult because then it adds to more behaviors and it adds to trust issues because you have children feeling like, nobody wants me, nobody wants to deal with me. So we just need people who are willing to be committed.
And when I think of foster care and foster parents, the first thing that I think of is that it truly does take a village to raise a child. So we do need someone who is going to work alongside the department in ensuring, the child's safety and well-being needs are being met. Advocating for the child is very important because sometimes these children have issues that they don't even, know about or are aware of. So being an advocate for the child is extremely important as well. And like Carlina said, someone who is truly going to love this child. With me being a parent, I always, keep in mind, and working in this field is always keeping the mindset of having the best interest of the child, doing what's best for the child. So it really is just important to pull people in who would like to foster, who would treat these children as if they're their own.
When we talk about folks that can do that and say have the capacity to do that, and I think both of you just hit some key points, the reason maybe they don't. What are some of the reasons that it may be rewarding for them to do? What have you seen or hear from foster parents that would maybe help somebody say, well, there's all those challenges, there's still a core reason that this is something that they're willing to step up and do?
I know for a lot of our foster parents, especially those who received a child into their home who initially had a lot of trauma, the most rewarding thing is to see how that child has grown and flourished. When you have a child come into your home who would not speak to anybody, would not eat, would not bathe, didn't want to be hugged, didn't want to be touched, and now they're calling that foster parent mama and daddy, and they're hugging them, and they're telling them they love them, and they're doing well in school, and they're just a completely different child. I think that is the most rewarding for foster parents, and definitely for us to see how love can just kind of salve those wounds, you know.
And I've seen it where initially, you know, the foster parent just wants to foster, but as time goes on, we end up reaching permanency with the case. It may be that now that foster parent would like guardianship of the child, or more so with the younger kids, they may express a desire to adopt the child or take custody of the child. So I think that that's very rewarding whenever we can reach permanency, because you'll hear a lot of foster parents say, you know, I just want to foster, nothing more, nothing less. But there are times whenever we actually reach permanency, it starts off as fostering, then they realize, you know, I actually want to keep this child long term. This child is a part of our family.
There is a financial piece that foster parents receive for fostering that child. And I don't know what the current rates are or anything, but this is a few $100s a month. But from what I've read, that's just a small fraction of the contribution that person that's a foster person. And you just went over some of the key elements that you can't compare. I mean, it's a job. I think you could say it's a job, but it's a job that you could get a little money for. But from what I've read, all of that money will still not sustain that child. Is that am I saying that right? Or
yes, it's foster parents do receive a monthly stipend, and it increases depending on the age of the child. And the state has increased foster care board payment rates slightly since years past. So there is some financial incentive, but I don't think that it pays back all the nights that you're up with a newborn baby. All the trips to the doctor, all the trips to the therapist, the school conferences, if Johnny is acting out. So this is certainly not something where somebody's gonna make a lot of money or get rich. They'll get enough to be able to maintain the child, buy them food, clothing, shoes, but it never pays the foster parent for everything that they have to do, all the nurturing and the care that they have to pour into a child.
That's a big part of it too, and that part of looking after beyond just whatever the financial piece is, that giving of your time, that late night kind of thing that happens, or somebody has an issue and you got to get up and deal with it, or they're acting out.
Yes, I think that when it comes to fostering children, it truly takes someone who is passionate and patient to do so. There is a board rate payment, but it will never equal to all of the late nights. You know, as Carlina said, it's a lot depending on the child and the child's needs.
Would it be safe to say that if you choose to foster, and we certainly hope folks that are hearing this show may be something they want to consider, that it is a life-changing experience for that foster person?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way you could really describe it sitting here in the studio, but the people that have experienced that, their life changes forever.
Yes, it does. It does. And we have foster parents who maybe they didn't adopt that child, but now that child is an adult and they still call that foster parent. They still reach out to them for guidance. They still go and live with them during the summers when they have breaks from college. Foster parents play a huge role.
We're going to take a break and come back and continue this conversation about foster care and the interest folks may have in being that foster care parent. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment. We're talking about a critical part of our society, foster care and looking after our children. We'll be back.
At home or away, knowing who is at your door is priceless. Star Communications is here to help with its doorbell security camera by Skybell. Live viewing and two-way audio equips you with the ability to always see and greet anyone that shows up at your door. If this is the kind of confidence you are looking for, call Star Communications today at 1-800-706-6538 to learn more about this intelligent security that you can always depend on.
We Should Know is on air. Thank you for being with us today. I'm JW Simmons, your host. We're talking about child care, and we're talking about it from the sense of foster care. And two folks that are directly involved with that, Carlina Simmons, foster care program manager, and Lekkyiah Sellers, who is the foster care supervisor for Sampson County. This whole thing that we've been talking about today, as it relates to foster care, comes down to the critical part of you guys being there and making a difference in that critical time when something has to be done. And I want to kind of, I guess, paint this picture for folks that maybe are listening or watching this show can understand. Without you, we would, in many cases, we could very possibly have small children living on the streets. I mean, am I being too dramatic about that? Let's discuss it in the point of how critical foster care is and what happens if you don't act or if somehow DSS is not engaged. Is it just that critical?
I would say that it's even more critical because foster care is the very last resort. So that means that we have to prove that a child is at imminent risk of harm in order for us to remove the child from that home. So we're talking about children at risk of death, not just at risk of homelessness. We're talking about serious neglect, serious injury that can lead to that child not thriving anymore. So that's how critical it is.
That's kind of a somber thought, but we've seen on news media where that's actually happened, Lekkyiah. How does that drive this picture? Excuse me.
I just think it all goes back to advocating and making sure that people do understand whenever we do get involved, just like Carlina stated, it is the last resort and it is very serious. It is something that you see on TV all the time. So just making sure that we are as proactive as we can.
Do you feel adequately staffed, and do you feel that you have the support you need within your partnership and within your agency?
I think across the board and across the state, we probably all agree that we could have more. We could have more staff, we could have more resources, we could have more support. That's not exclusive to Sampson County, because the issue is just so big and there's so many children in need that we're just kind of capturing who we can. But, you know, God only knows about the children who slip through the cracks, who we don't get reports about, who we don't even know what's going on. So I think that there's always open opportunities for there to be more resources, more staff, more opportunities to kind of widen the net, so to speak, so that when we cast it, we're pulling in more families who need help.
So oftentimes this thing starts as a result of somebody calling and saying there's an issue, and you hit something very critical Carlina. I think it's this idea that we're talking that if there's not intervention, that we're literally talking at the very minimum, a child being abused in some way or neglected. And when we say neglect, we're not talking about they don't get the certain color sneakers they wanted,
right,
or nothing. We're talking a child with nothing to eat that maybe is really being abused physically and emotionally to the point that you don't know it, but you get that call and you don't have a choice. It's not like you can go out and reconstruct a family.
Correct. And not only just nothing to eat, but not being taken to the doctor like they should, not going to the dentist like they should, children with just a mouthful of cavities, or serious medical needs that are not being addressed consistently, children who have specialists at Duke that they're not seeing consistently. So that type of neglect where you have children at serious risk of permanent injury or even death. So
it's something in this conversation causes me to want to back up a step and I just ask the question, have we missed something somewhere in the sense of just basic understanding of what a family is and the responsibilities of being a parent? Has somewhere in our journey as a civilized society, is that a piece that we have not emphasized enough? What seems to be driving that? A child is not something you just, as you obviously know, is something that as you build your family, you just don't take that and say, oh, well, I just thought I'd like to have a baby. That's just not the picture. I want to kind of get your feeling. What do we need to do? Is there something we can do early prevention, early on? Is there changes we need to make in our education system, our understanding of what parenthood is?
I definitely think that school systems could benefit from discussing parenthood a lot more. I do know that when I was in school, we did have a parenting class, but I don't feel like it went as in depth as it should have. It was a really basic parenting class where you would take like an egg home, and the egg couldn't crack.
Right.
That was the notion of the class, but it is a lot being a parent, and I don't think that many people understand the great deal of responsibility. Yes, if your child does have extreme medical needs and you're deciding not to follow up with specialists or take them to their appointments for whatever reason, that could be considered medical neglect. I think that a lot of people just think that parenting is housing a child and feeding a child, but there's many other things stand on top of their dental, their medical, and I just don't think that it is being taught in school in depth. I just think that it's a very basic experience in school when it is taught.
Carlina, one of the things and I know you guys are keenly aware, but we've got unbelievable steeples throughout this region of the state, rural North Carolina. Oftentimes, if I'm traveling, I'm always just very pleased, and it's, I guess, a sense of peace for me to see all these steeples. That tells me that there's core values. There's core principles there. You could call it the Ten Commandments. You could look at whatever book you want, but that particular structure is there. What's the role of faith-based organizations, and have they been engaged, do you think, as much as they should be in helping with this? And I don't want to use the word problem, but I'll just say this issue.
Well, I think that churches and other faith-based communities or organizations have a very good opportunity to be boots on the ground. But I think that there are so many layers that contribute to the problem. And I think that when people know that they have a serious issue, they get very good at masking it. So you're not necessarily going to go to church and broadcast to everybody that you have a substance abuse issue. There's the deeper things that people are ashamed to share. And they feel like they have to just go into church and kind of put on that brave face and give you hugs and say hallelujah. But when you go home, you have your own kind of little private hell that you're dealing with. So I think that, our spiritual leaders could definitely benefit from maybe being a little more keenly aware, asking questions and observing the things that are not being said. And I just think that people need to feel like they have an opportunity to just kind of lay themselves bare and be open and honest with their spiritual leaders about what's going on so that they can get the help. So I just think it's twofold.
Do we have folks, Lekkyiah, that just recognize that they're not able to continue to function with that child and say to you guys, look, I've got to give my child up, I can't look after him?
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's not always where we are getting a referral. Sometimes people may come to the department, and just say that it's too much, or it's just they can't be the parent that they need to be for that child. And it's not always the child. Sometimes it's, just the parent has a lot of issues that they're dealing with, which is causing them to, not parent the child as they should.
And that within itself tells us that at some point in this cycle of life, we're missing a huge piece of education. We're missing a huge piece, because if a person does something, and we know how children are made, there's got to be some connection there to say, listen, you need to think about this. This is a serious, critical move that you're about to make. So I want to kind of continue discussion when we come back for our last segment. As we look forward to your final conversation on the show here about this, I want to make sure we don't miss a piece. And by that, I just simply mean questions that somebody may have. So when we come back, we're going to try to address those and look into that in a bit of detail. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on the last segment of the show. We're going to try to address some key questions that you might have and some things that you might be thinking about and how you can act to help. We'll be back in a moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for being with us. We're coming up on the last segment of the show today. We should know. JW Simmons, your host. We're talking about child care, particularly as it relates to foster care right here in this area. Again, I want to thank you for each and every week sending us your information. You've got contacts you've made, you've got questions you have. We should know edu@gmail.com is the email address. Again, that's we should know edu@gmail.com. I want to thank all those folks at WCLN Radio that mention the show each and every day. Robert Stroud with the Boogie Shoes Radio Network on Saturday is a big supporter of what we're trying to do here, and we appreciate all he does for the community. All the other folks at the radio station, we give you thumbs up, to include Wayne Weeks and Tommy Elliott and others that mention what we're doing here. We're now into literally gone beyond a decade with this show, and you've been the reason that we've been able to maintain not only airtime, but bring in the people that talk about subjects that is important to us. Today, a subject that's critically important to us now and for our future is foster care, and it talks about some of the things we've talked about off air, and that is how critical it is for folks to understand what the journey is when a child comes into our life. And Lekkyiah, you mentioned a number of things, and one of those was education. How do we do that better? And how do we make, more public the role and the critical role of parents? Because parents determine what all of our futures are.
Well, I definitely think that it starts, within the school system. As I stated previously, just being more in depth about parenting and what all that entails. A lot of people don't talk about the hardships of parenting. When a child is born, having to adjust your whole life changes, having to adjust your sleep pattern, the baby waking up every 2 hours, appointments, having to take kids to appointments. It's a big financial responsibility as well. And if you don't make, a certain amount of money, then you're not eligible for certain benefits. Daycare is another big financial responsibility. I know people who pay thousands of dollars in daycare every month. So I just, it does start with education. I do feel like we need to dig into, what all it is being a parent. It's not just, having a cute baby, but it comes with a great deal of responsibility.
This whole issue of understanding that role of what nurturing a child is that something we just assume and listen to your comment? Do we just make the assumption that a parent will nurture as they were nurtured? And if we're doing that, then maybe the conclusion is a wrong conclusion because they may have not been nurtured.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Parenting is the most important thing that you will do if you are blessed to have a child in your life, and there's many different ways to be a parent. Mm-hmm. But it is the most important thing that you will do if you do parent a child. But there's no training unless you've done the parenting wrong, and then the reactionary thing is to put somebody in parenting classes. But up front, there's no training. So you think about doctors, nurses, firefighters, police officers. Everybody gets trained for these really important jobs, but the most important job in the world, you receive no training ahead of time. So it's interesting how that works. It really is. And
as a supervisor, I do try to have a non-judgmental mindset, because sometimes what a person is doing is all that they know. There is no handbook on how to be a parent. So I try to keep that in mind. You do have to have that mindset whenever you are in this field of work. What you may say, like if you go into someone's home and you're like, Johnny's room is a mess, but to that person, Johnny's room may be clean. Mm-hmm. So just trying to keep a non-judgmental mindset, but sometimes, I do want to state that people are parenting the best way that they know how.
Are we having more of those folks in society that we're now dealing with that didn't have the moms and dads that are now involved in various things because of their traumas?
I think so. I think as you see the generations go forward, you see there's so many changes as far as mindset, morals, foundations that were laid that people don't get, I guess, from a traditional sense. So you just see it as the generations come up that there's just so many differences in parenting styles and beliefs and I would really love to see a study on COVID and how it has affected mental health and parenting, because we've seen an uptick in a lot of the issues as far as substance abuse and domestic violence since COVID. So I think that's an important impact as well on the way that people are parenting. When you're cooped up in the house with your children for 2.5 years and also trying to be a teacher, I think that can break the strongest of people. So we're just seeing a lot in society that's impacting the mental health and the well-being of parents that in turn affects the way that they parent their children.
I was recently intrigued with, I was reading a transcript just recently that was aired, in fact, in June here, that was done. And the two folks that were being interviewed is Dr. Julian Peterson and Dr. James Dinsley. They're co-founders of a project called The Violence Project. And in that interview, it came up about why are we having these children, young people, acting out in such a weird, violent way. And I'm going to quote what Dr. Julian Peterson's research indicated. Is she said, we started looking into the life and histories of perpetrators, these people that are doing these horrendous crimes, murders, of mass shootings across the plane of 5 years. And she said our goal was to try to understand where this is coming from. Why are we seeing these increases in these kinds of disasters? And they resourced it back to these early childhood traumatic events. That one of the kind of common factors that was involved was the early childhood event. And she just simply said that it started early childhood trauma, and that from that it built into these horrendous kinds of acts of violence. And now we're seeing violence everywhere. So do you guys kind of agree with that finding, that these pretty horrific things that are going on in these mass shootings somehow was engaged in early childhood or started in early childhood?
I would say probably in some instances that's very accurate. I think that there's a lot of young people holding on to things, probably traumas that are deeply embedded that maybe they've never even shared with anybody. And then you just kind of see it bubble over into what we're seeing. So
I would say mental health too. With the younger generation, I just know that a lot of them kind of shut down when it comes to addressing mental health and getting the help and services that they need. And unfortunately, sometimes whenever we don't address our mental health, things tend to spiral out of control.
And the speed and immediacy of it is another thing that comes to mind. How quick, can you get that help? I mean, I'm sitting here looking at two of you guys. I mean, how quick can you get somebody there? Do we have trained people available?
Well, it just depends. As it relates to mental health, I think there's a great need for more mental health resources, more quality mental health resources. And sadly, I just think in America, the level of mental health care depends on what you can afford, which is sad, because you have people of a lower socioeconomic status who cannot afford to get the mental health treatment that they need. And I don't know, I don't think you can put a price on your well-being. So this is some systemic issues that need to be corrected.
And I think we're talking a bigger picture too, in the sense that what you guys do is not only critically important, but we're talking about the need for a human being to have a sense of affirmation, a sense of self-worth, and they're going to find that somewhere.
Yes.
If it's in criminal activity, if it's a gang or wherever, if they're not getting it at home, or they're not getting it from their job, or they're not getting that experience, if somebody's willing to give them that affirmation, even if it's demonic. I'm reading articles constantly saying they're going to seek that out. So I want to thank both of you for being with us today. Unfortunately, we're coming up closure of time. Great discussion, conversation. Again, I realize folks out there that's watching and listening to the show, we've just touched a few of the key things. And your service is greatly appreciated. And thank you for what you do. So we look forward to having you back soon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week with another subject and comment that maybe will improve your life and help you better understand what's going on around you. Stay tuned, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.